I always thought a mother was sacred in a child's life. After 42 years of raising Linda, I discovered I was wrong. That Thursday afternoon, I had come back early from a doctor's appointment and decided not to tell anyone. The kitchen door was slightly open, and that's when I heard my own daughter talking on the phone with a friend. My mom has become such a burden in my life, She doesn't get that. I have my own problems, my marriage, my kids. Sometimes I think it would just be easier if she wasn't here. The words hit me like lightning, and I felt my heart shatter into pieces. Right there, hiding behind the door of the house I live in, I discovered I had become a burden to the person I loved most in the world. My name is Emily. I am 68 years old, and I've been living with my daughter Linda for 3 years, ever since my husband David passed away. I was always a quiet woman, the kind who prefers to observe before speaking, who solves problems without making a scene. I raised Linda with so much love while David worked day and night to provide for our family. I always thought I had been a good mother, that I had given love, education, and values to my daughter. When she invited me to live with her after I was widowed, I thought it was a gesture of love and gratitude. How wrong I was. The house I live in is no longer my house. It's Linda and Michael's house. I live in the room in the back, the one that used to be a storage room, and I try to stay out of the way. During these 3 years, I've realized how much my presence bothers them. When I walk into the kitchen and the conversation stops, when they suggest I go rest in my room while they have visitors, when my grandchildren give me an obligatory kiss and then run back to their phones, I became a shadow in the house that should have been my home. Michael was never rude to me, but his glances say it all. I am an obstacle he has to tolerate. Linda tries to hide it, but after what I heard today, I know she feels exactly the same as her husband. Over these years, I've watched them push me aside little by little. At first, they would ask my opinion on the food, on the kids, on house decisions. Gradually, those questions became less frequent until they disappeared completely. I remember when I first arrived at this house. Linda hugged me at the door and said, "Mom, this is your house now. You're going to be so comfortable here with us." Michael nodded with a smile that I interpreted as genuine at the time. The kids ran to show me the room they had prepared for me. Everything seemed perfect, like it was the beginning of a beautiful new chapter in my life. The first few months were relatively calm. I helped with the housework. I watched the kids when Linda and Michael had to go out. I cooked on the weekends. I felt useful, needed. But slowly I started to notice subtle changes. My suggestions about raising the kids were met with forced smiles. My offers to help with cleaning were rejected with, "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of it." My attempts to join family conversations were interrupted or ignored. At first I thought it was my imagination, that maybe I was being too sensitive after losing David. He always told me I had a tendency to overthink things. But over time, the signs became impossible to ignore. Linda started sighing when I asked questions. Michael started changing the channel when I walked into the living room. The kids answered with one-word replies when I tried to talk to them. I realized that my presence had become uncomfortable for everyone. During family dinners, I was the only one making an effort to keep the conversation going. I'd ask about the kids' school, about Michael's work, about their plans for the weekend. The answers were short, polite, but cold. It was as if I was interrupting something, as if my mere presence was an intrusion. The weekends were especially hard. Linda and Michael would make plans that didn't include me. "Mom, we're going out for a bit. You can stay here and rest," they'd say, and I would stay home alone watching TV in my room, listening to the silence that filled the empty house. Sometimes I wondered if this is how old furniture felt, present but ignored, taking up space with no apparent purpose. Diane, my neighbor and only confidant, would visit me on Wednesday afternoons. She was also a widow and understood the loneliness that comes after losing your life partner. "Emily," she would tell me, "you are too good for them. Linda doesn't know how to appreciate what she has." But I always defended my daughter. I always found excuses for her coldness. "She has a very busy life," I'd say. "Times are different now. Families are different." How many times did I lie to myself to protect the love I felt for her? How many times did I pretend not to see the annoyance in her eyes when I showed up at the wrong moment? How many times did I swallow my tears so I wouldn't bother anyone with my widow's grief? I had become an expert at making myself invisible, at not taking up too much space, at not asking for too much. The house's routine continued without me. Linda would get up early to make breakfast for the kids and get Michael ready for work. I would stay in my room until I heard everyone had left, and only then would I come out to make my own breakfast. I spent the mornings watching TV shows on low volume, reading old magazines, organizing and reorganizing my few belongings. The afternoons were for my own chores. I washed my clothes separately, I cleaned my room, I kept my things in perfect order. I didn't want to give them any reason to complain. I had learned to be completely self-sufficient inside that house, as if I were a tenant paying rent by being invisible. When Linda got home from work, I would have already made dinner, not because she asked me to, but because it was my way of contributing, of showing that my presence had some value. She would thank me with a tired smile, but she never showed real enthusiasm for the food I had prepared with so much care. Michael ate in silence, focused on his phone. The kids wolfed down their food quickly to get back to their activities. The nights were for loneliness. After washing the dishes and cleaning the kitchen, I would retreat to my room. I could hear the laughter coming from the living room, the lively family conversations, the sounds of a life that continued without me. It was like living next to happiness without being able to join in. Sundays were especially painful. That was the day families got together when we were all supposed to be united. But even on those days, I felt like a stranger. Linda and Michael planned activities that subtly excluded me. "Mom, we're going to take the kids to the mall. It's a lot of walking for you. It's better if you stay here and rest." Or, "We're going to visit Michael's parents. We don't want to bother you with the drive." I gradually understood that my place in this family was that of a necessary burden, someone they tolerated out of moral obligation but not out of genuine desire. I had lost my husband, my house, my independence, and now I was losing my dignity. I had become a shadow moving through the house without purpose, without value, without a future. But that Thursday afternoon when I heard those cruel words on the phone, something inside me changed forever. For the first time in 3 years, I stopped making excuses for my daughter's behavior. For the first time, I saw the situation with absolute clarity. And for the first time, I began to consider that maybe it was time to do something about it. What they didn't know was that everything was about to change. Because a woman who had survived 68 years of life, who had raised a daughter, who had faced loss and hardship, was not just going to accept being treated like old furniture that nobody wants. That night, as we ate dinner in silence, I looked at each of them and made a decision that would change our lives forever. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I simply smiled and wished them good night. They had no idea that this was the beginning of the end of the life they knew. That night, I stayed awake very late, staring at the ceiling of my small room, planning every move I would make in the coming days. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman with the power to decide with her own resources, with the ability to change her destiny. Linda had said it would be easier if I wasn't there. Very soon, she would have the chance to find out exactly how easy life was without my presence. It was time to teach them the true value of what they were about to lose, and I would do it in the most silent and effective way possible, by simply disappearing from their lives just as they wished. But when I did it, it would be on my terms, not theirs. The sunrise found a different Emily, a woman who had rediscovered her strength, her worth, and her right to be respected. The next few days would be the beginning of the most important lesson I would ever teach my family. The value of what you have is only appreciated when it's gone. And I was completely prepared to teach them that lesson, no matter how much it hurt me to learn it too. In that moment, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't a loud shattering. It was quiet, like when a dry branch gives way under the weight of the rain. I spent the whole night awake, staring at the ceiling of the back room, remembering when Linda was little and would run to my bed during storms. I would rock her in my arms and sing softly until she fell asleep. Where was that little girl who called me my queen and said that when she grew up, she would take care of me forever? When did I stop being her mother and become her burden? The following days, I began to observe everything with different eyes. The way Linda sighed when I asked her something, the way Michael changed the channel when I walked into the living room, the way my grandchildren responded with one-word answers when I tried to talk. I remembered all the times I did laundry, tidied the house, and cooked meals without anyone noticing or saying thank you. I remembered the weekends I spent alone in my room while they went out to have fun. I remembered how many times I swallowed my tears so I wouldn't bother anyone with my widow's grief. It was as if I were a ghost, living among people who had forgotten I existed. Diane, my neighbor, always said I was too good for them, that Linda didn't know how to appreciate what she had. But I always defended my daughter. I always found excuses for her coldness. She has a very busy life, I'd tell her. Times are different now. Families are different. How many times did I lie to myself to protect the love I felt for her? How many times did I pretend not to see the contempt in her eyes when I appeared at the wrong moment? I also started to remember things I had chosen to forget. How Linda complained when she had to pick me up from the hospital after my heart surgery. How she sighed when the doctor said I would need special care for a few weeks. How Michael muttered something about more expenses when they bought my medications. I had interpreted all of that as worry, as love disguised as stress. But now, after hearing those cruel words on the phone, I finally saw the truth. Saw the I really was a burden in their lives. I remembered the day I came to live with them. Linda had insisted so much that I thought she really needed me, that she wanted me close. "Mom, you can't stay alone in that big house. You'll have company here. The kids will brighten up your life." But now I realized that maybe the decision hadn't been out of love, but out of obligation. Maybe Linda felt she had no other choice after David died, that society expected her to take care of her widowed mother. The first few months had been a fake honeymoon. Linda included me in conversations. She asked for my opinions on the food on the kids. Michael was polite. The grandkids hugged me when they got home from school. But gradually, that courtesy wore thin. The smiles became forced. The conversations got shorter. The invitations to participate disappeared. I remembered the first time I felt like a burden. It had been Mason's birthday, my oldest grandson. I had spent all afternoon making his favorite coconut cream pie, the same one I used to make for Linda when she was a girl, when it was time to sing Happy Birthday. I was in the kitchen finishing the decorations on the pie. I heard the laughter, the shouts of Happy Birthday, the whole celebration. When I came out with the pie, I saw they had already lit the candles on another pie that Linda had bought from the bakery. "Oh, Mom," Linda said to me with an embarrassed smile, "I forgot to tell you I already ordered a pie, but yours looks delicious. We'll save it for tomorrow." Michael avoided my gaze. Mason, my grandson, didn't even notice there were two pies, and I, as always, smiled and said it was no problem that mine could wait. But that night alone in my room, I cried like I hadn't cried since David's funeral. That had been the beginning. After that, my efforts to contribute were less and less welcome. When I cooked, Linda would say she had eaten a lot at work. When I cleaned, Michael would comment that they had hired a cleaning lady for that. When I offered to watch the kids, Linda preferred to take them to her mother-in-law's because it's closer to my work. Little by little, I withdrew. I stopped offering to help with food. I stopped suggesting activities for the weekend. I stopped asking about their lives. And curiously, nobody noticed my absence. The family's life continued exactly the same, as if I were a piece of furniture that had finally stopped being in the way. Diane was the only one who noticed my sadness. "Emily," she'd tell me during our coffee afternoons, "you haven't been the same since you moved in with Linda. You used to be a woman with a spark, with plans, with a will to live. Now you look like a little caged bird." But I didn't know how to explain to her that I felt like a stranger in my own daughter's house, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. The nights were especially difficult. David and I had a habit of talking before bed, telling each other about our day, making plans for the next. Those nightly conversations had been the heart of our marriage for 45 years. Now, in my small room in the back, the silence spread like a heavy blanket. I listened to the sounds of the house, Linda and Michael watching TV, the kids playing video games, the laughter coming from the living room. All those sounds reminded me that life was going on without me. One night, while I was fighting insomnia, I heard Linda and Michael arguing in their bedroom. Their voices came muffled through the walls, but I could make out some words. "Your mom," "space," "privacy." I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but the tone was one of frustration, of exhaustion. That night, I understood that even in their private moments, I was a source of conflict between them. Sundays had become especially painful. Before, when David was alive, Sundays were family days. We would go to church together, prepare a special meal, have visitors over, or visit relatives. Sundays had a ritual, they had meaning. Now Sundays were days to remember everything I had lost. Linda and Michael had developed a Sunday routine that subtly excluded me. They'd get up late, eat breakfast in their pajamas while watching TV, and make spontaneous plans that didn't include me. "Mom, we're going to take the kids out for a while. You stay here and rest." And I would stay in the empty house watching TV shows I wasn't interested in, feeling the weight of time stretching out with no purpose. I started to miss things I used to take for granted. I missed cooking for someone who truly appreciated the food. I missed having long conversations about topics that interested me. I missed feeling useful, needed, valued. I missed being Emily, not just Linda's mom, or the grandmother who lives in the back room. My friends from my old neighborhood had tried to keep in touch at first. They would call me, invite me to their coffee meetups, to prayer groups, to birthdays. But Linda's neighborhood was far away, and I depended on her for transportation. "Mom, I have commitments that day," or "the traffic is too bad to go all the way over there." Those became the usual answers. Gradually, the invitations dwindled, and my friends understood that I was no longer available for the social life we had shared for decades. Loneliness became my constant companion. A strange loneliness because I was surrounded by family, but I felt more alone than when I lived by myself in my house after David's death. At least then, the loneliness was honest. I knew I was alone, and I could handle that reality. But this loneliness in the midst of family was confusing, painful in a different way. I started spending more time in my room, not because they asked me to, but because it was the only place I could be myself without bothering anyone. I reorganized my few belongings, looked at old photo albums, read books I had brought from my old house. My world had shrunk to 4 walls and the memories that fit in a small dresser. One afternoon, while organizing my papers, I found letters David had written to me when we were dating. Letters full of plans, of dreams, of promises about the future we would build together. One of the letters said, "Emily, when we're old, we're going to sit on the porch of our house and watch life go by surrounded by the love of our children and grandchildren." Reading those words, I realized how different reality had turned out. David had died convinced that I would be well taken care of, surrounded by the love of Linda and her family. His last words had been, "Take good care of her, honey. Your mom gave everything for us." Linda had cried and promised she would always take care of me, that I would never want for anything. And technically, I didn't want for anything. I had a roof, food, clean clothes, but I was missing the most important thing, feeling loved, valued, and respected. The memories of my life before being widowed became more vivid during those lonely afternoons. David and I had been a team. He worked at the hardware store in our small town. I took care of the house and raised Linda, but it wasn't just taking care of the house. I was the administrator, the one who made decisions, the one who solved problems. David consulted me on everything. He valued my opinions. He treated me like his partner in life. I remembered the afternoons we spent planning Linda's future, her education, her sweet 16, her wedding. We were 2 parents working together to give our daughter the best life possible. Linda had studied business at the university in the city. She had married Michael. She had gotten a good job. We had achieved everything we set out to do. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the mother who fought for her dreams and had become the burden holding back her happiness. I remembered Linda's wedding day. David and I had spent all our savings to give her the party she dreamed of. I had sewn her dress with my own hands, working for months on every detail. On the wedding day, when I saw her walk down the aisle, David and I held hands and cried with pride. "We did it, Emily," he whispered in my ear. "Our little girl is going to be very happy." But I also remembered something I had forgotten. After the ceremony, during the reception, I heard Michael comment to a friend, "Good thing Linda's parents live in that small town. We're not going to have the problem of clingy in-laws." At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was just a newlywed's nervous joke. Now I realized that maybe it had been a declaration of intent. The first years of Linda's marriage were happy for everyone. David and I would visit them from time to time. They would come to our hometown for the important holidays. There was a geographical distance that kept the relationship cordial. When Mason and Hope were born, I would go to help for the first few weeks, but then I'd return to my house. I was the loving grandmother who visits and leaves before becoming a bother. Everything changed when David got sick. The cancer took him in 6 months. 6 terrible months during which Linda helped me as much as she could. She came on weekends. She went with me to doctor's appointments when she could. She stayed with me during the hardest nights. I thought those months had strengthened our relationship, that we had rediscovered the mother-daughter connection that seemed to have faded over the years. After the funeral, Linda insisted I couldn't stay alone in the house in our hometown. "Mom, there are too many sad memories here. Come with us to the city. The kids will cheer you up. You'll have company. You won't be lonely." Her argument sounded so convincing, so full of genuine love and concern, that I agreed without thinking twice. Now I realized that maybe Linda had felt obligation more than desire. Maybe society, her friends, the extended family, expected her to take care of her widowed mother. Maybe Michael had agreed because he had no other socially acceptable option. Maybe the kids had accepted because they had no say in the decision. The process of moving had been painful. I had to get rid of most of my belongings, the furniture David and I had bought over 45 years of marriage, the material memories of a lifetime. "Don't worry, Mom," Linda told me. "At home, we have everything you need. Just bring your clothes and your personal things." But a house isn't just furniture. A house is autonomy. It's privacy. It's the right to decide what to do with your time and your space. By moving in with Linda, I had given up all of that without realizing what I was losing. I had traded the honest loneliness of widowhood for the disguised loneliness of family life. During those sleepless nights in the back room, I began to understand that the problem wasn't just that I felt unloved. The problem was that I had lost my identity. For 65 years, I had been Emily, David's girlfriend, David's wife, Linda's mother, the homemaker, the decision maker. Now I was simply Linda's mom who lives with us. My days had no purpose other than not to bother anyone. I got up when everyone had left, ate breakfast alone, watched TV, read, and waited for them to come back. It was an existence without goals, without challenges, without the satisfaction of feeling useful. It was like being in a permanent waiting room, waiting for something that never arrived. One afternoon, while Diane and I were having coffee at the small table in my room, she asked me a question that resonated with me for days. "Emily, do you think David would be happy to see you like this?" The question hurt because I knew the answer. David had loved my strength, my independence, my ability to solve problems. He had admired me for the way we raised Linda together, for how I managed the house and the finances when he was sick. David would never have wanted to see me turned into a shadow hiding so as not to be a bother. He would have told me, "Emily, you are worth so much more than this. Don't let anyone make you feel like a burden." But David wasn't here anymore to remind me who I really was, to give me the strength I needed to defend myself. That night, after Diane's visit, I lay awake thinking about everything I had lost. My house, my independence, my identity, my purpose, my dignity. But I also thought about what I had left, my savings, my health, my experience, my intelligence. I was a 68-year-old woman, not an invalid. I had resources. I had options. I had the ability to change my situation. For the first time in months, I felt like something more than a victim of circumstances. I felt like a woman with the power to decide. And if it was true that my presence was a burden to Linda and her family, if it really would be easier for them if I wasn't there, then maybe it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. But I would do it on my own terms, not theirs. For the next 2 weeks, I transformed into a different person, but nobody noticed. I kept doing my normal routine, waking up early, making coffee, making my bed, watching TV on low volume. But inside, I was planning every move with the precision of someone who isn't in a hurry, but is certain of what they want. I had learned something important in life. The best decisions are made in silence, far from prying eyes and unsolicited advice. First, I went to the bank and withdrew all my savings, $62,000 that David had left for me. Money I had never touched because I wanted to leave it as an inheritance for Linda and the grandkids. What irony thinking about that now. Then I looked for Diane and asked her to help me find a small apartment to rent. "You finally come to your senses," she said, and I just smiled. We found a perfect place. A one-bedroom apartment in a simple building far from that house where I was no longer welcome. The hardest part was canceling the automatic transfer I made every month to Linda's account, $500 that I deposited faithfully to help with household expenses. She never knew that money came from my savings. I think she always assumed it was from my pension. Michael also didn't know that I was paying half of the light and water bills. They would find out when the bills arrived next month, and they saw they had to cover all the expenses themselves. Meanwhile, I watched the family continue their routine, treating me like a piece of furniture. Linda complaining about work, Michael watching TV, the grandkids glued to their phones. None of them noticed that I had stopped doing certain things. I didn't do their laundry anymore. I didn't tidy up the living room. I didn't make dinner on the weekends anymore. It was incredible how they only noticed my presence when they wanted to complain about something, but they never noticed when I stopped doing the tasks that made their lives easier. The process of planning my exit gave me something back that I had lost. Control over my own life. For the first time in 3 years, I was making important decisions without having to ask permission or justify myself to anyone. It was an intoxicating feeling, like remembering how to walk after being in a wheelchair for a long time. During those 2 weeks, I began to see my situation with a clarity I hadn't had before. I realized I had been living like a permanent guest in a house where my presence was tolerated, but not desired. I had been apologizing for existing, shrinking my personality to not take up too much space, silencing my needs so I wouldn't be a bother, but not anymore. It was time to remind everyone who Emily truly was. The apartment hunt was an exciting adventure. Diane came with me to see 3 different options. The first one was too small. The second was in a neighborhood I didn't like. But the third one was perfect. It had a small but bright living room, a comfortable bedroom, a functional kitchen, and most importantly, a balcony with plants that reminded me of the garden David and I had taken care of together for years. "This is it," I told Diane as soon as we walked in. "I'm going to be happy here." The woman renting the apartment, Mrs. Miller, was an older woman like us, also a widow. When I explained my situation without going into painful details, she nodded with understanding. "Oh dear, it's a good thing you made this decision. A woman shouldn't live where she isn't valued." The rental process was surprisingly easy. I had a good credit history, solid references, and the money to pay 3 months up front. I signed the lease that same day. For the first time in years, I had my own space again, a place where I could make my own rules, watch TV at the volume I wanted, and have visitors over whenever I felt like it. Diane helped me buy the basic furniture. Nothing fancy, just the essentials. A queen-sized bed like the one I had shared with David, a small dresser, a round table for 2, a comfortable armchair for watching TV, and some kitchen utensils. I wanted the place to be ready for when I decided to move in permanently. The hardest part of the whole process was keeping the secret. Every day I spent in that house feeling invisible, knowing that soon I would be completely free, was like holding a treasure that no one else could see. There were moments when I wanted to scream the truth at them, that I didn't depend on them, that I had options, that I could live perfectly fine without their forced charity. But I held back. I had learned that the best lessons are taught with actions, not words. During those days of preparation, I started to watch my family with the eyes of someone who would soon be a stranger. Linda would come home from work tired and cranky. She complained about everything: the traffic, her boss, the house expenses. Michael lived glued to the TV or his phone. He barely participated in family conversations. The grandkids were in their teenage world, absorbed in their devices and their school problems. I realized that I had been the silent glue that kept some family routines running. When I stopped making them dinner on Sundays, they had to improvise. When I stopped folding the laundry that came out of the dryer, it piled up in baskets for days. When I stopped cleaning the living room after their TV nights, the house started to look neglected. But nobody said anything. Nobody asked if I was feeling okay, if I needed help, if something was wrong. They just assumed it was part of my new way of not bothering them. It was as if they had confirmed all my suspicions about how little they truly valued me. One night, while we were eating in the usual silence, Mason commented, "Grandma, you don't make your rice pudding on Sundays anymore." It was the first time in weeks that anyone had mentioned something I used to do for them. "You're right, sweetheart," I replied with a smile. "I don't make it anymore." Linda looked up from her plate for a moment, but said nothing. Michael kept chewing as if he hadn't heard. That small interaction confirmed something important. My contributions to this family had been noticed and valued at least by the grandkids, but nobody was going to acknowledge it until it was too late. Diane had been my silent accomplice during the whole process. She understood better than anyone the importance of what I was doing. "Emily," she told me one afternoon while we were having coffee in my future apartment, "what you're doing takes a lot of courage. Not every woman our age dares to start over." "I'm not starting over, Diane," I replied. "I'm going back to being who I always was." And it was true. During those weeks of preparation, I felt as if I were waking up from a long, confusing dream. The Emily who had raised Linda with firmness and love, who had managed the household finances for 45 years, who had made tough decisions during David's illness, that woman had never left. She had just been asleep, hidden under the layers of deference and self-sacrifice I had adopted to survive in Linda's house. I packed my belongings gradually without anyone noticing. I didn't have many things. When I moved in with Linda, I had to get rid of almost everything. But I had the essentials: my clothes, some photos, important documents, some jewelry. David had given me my favorite books. Everything fit into 3 medium-sized boxes that Diane had stored at her house. The plan was simple but effective. One Friday morning, when everyone had left for work and school, I would walk out of that house forever. I would leave a letter explaining my decision without giving details about where I was going or how to contact me. I wanted them to experience exactly what they had said they wanted: my total absence from their lives. But before I left, I had a few more things to do. I went to the bank and closed the joint savings account I had with Linda since I was widowed. It had been a precautionary measure she had suggested, in case anything happens to you, Mom. Now I realized it had been more of a way to have access to my money if they ever needed it. There wasn't much in that account, but it was mine, and I took it all. I also made changes to my will. Originally, all my money and my few possessions were designated for Linda and the grandkids. Now, a considerable part would go to Diane, who had been my only true friend during these difficult years. Another part would go to a foundation that helped elderly women in vulnerable situations. Linda and the grandkids would still receive something because despite everything, they were still my family, but they would no longer be my sole heirs. These legal changes gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. I was taking control not only of my present, but also of my future and what would be left after I was gone. I was no longer the passive woman who accepted what others decided for her. I was a woman who made her own decisions and lived with the consequences. During the last week before my departure, I watched my family with a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because despite everything I loved them, and I knew this separation would cause them pain. Relief because I had finally found the courage to do what I needed to do to save my dignity and my peace of mind. Linda seemed especially stressed that week. She had been having problems at work. Michael had been more grumpy than usual, and the kids were in the middle of exams. I watched her deal with all these problems while I remained quiet in my corner, offering no help or advice. For the first time in years, she had to handle the family crises completely alone. It was interesting to see how the family functioned when I wasn't available as the emotional release valve. Linda had no one to tell her work frustrations to. Michael didn't have anyone to serve him coffee just the way he liked it. The grandkids didn't have anyone to make them their favorite snacks. Small things, but altogether they made daily life harder and less comfortable. On Thursday night, my last night in that house, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake reviewing the 3 years I had lived there, remembering the good and bad moments. There had been good moments. The laughter with the grandkids, some affectionate conversations with Linda, the quiet family dinners. But those moments had become increasingly rare, drowned out by the constant tension of feeling unwanted. I got up several times during the night to look out my window. The house was silent. Everyone was sleeping soundly. For them it was a normal night. They didn't know it was the last night we would spend under the same roof. Tomorrow night, when they came home from work and school, they would find my absence and a letter explaining why I was no longer there. The letter had been the hardest thing to write. I wanted to be honest, but not cruel, firm, but not vengeful. I wanted them to understand my reasons without making them feel excessively guilty. After several drafts, I had managed to write something that expressed my feelings without being destructive. "Dear Linda," the letter began, "since you said it would be easier if I wasn't here, I decided it was time for you to find out how easy life really is without this burden around. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. You're all going to find out what life is like without this obstacle around. I wish you all happiness. With love, Mom." I left no address. I left no phone number. I gave no explanations beyond those lines. They wanted me to disappear from their lives, so that was exactly what I was going to do. Friday dawned sunny and beautiful. It was as if the universe was celebrating my new beginning. I waited until everyone was gone. Linda to work, Michael to the office, the grandkids to school. When the house was empty, I got my 3 boxes from Diane's house and put them in the taxi she had called for me. I walked through the house one last time, looking at every room where I had lived for 3 years, the kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals, the living room where I had watched TV in silence, the small back room that had been my refuge and my prison. I didn't feel nostalgic, only relief. I left the letter on the kitchen table in the exact spot where Linda always put her purse when she got home from work. It was impossible for her not to see it. I took my house keys and left them next to the letter. I wouldn't need them anymore. Diane was waiting for me in the taxi. "Are you ready?" she asked. "More than ready," I answered. "I've been ready for a long time." As the taxi pulled away from that house, I didn't look back. My new life was waiting for me, and I had no time to waste grieving the past. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. We arrived at the new apartment around noon. Diane helped me unpack and settle my things. It was amazing how my few belongings filled the space and made it feel like home. I hung the photos of David in the living room, put my books on a small shelf, and arranged my clothes in the new dresser. "There," Diane said when we finished, "you have your home again." And she was right. It wasn't just a rented apartment. It was my home, the place where I could be Emily without having to ask permission or justify myself to anyone. That afternoon, as I had my first coffee in my new kitchen, I thought about what they were probably doing at Linda's house. They probably hadn't even discovered my absence yet. Linda would get home from work at 6 Michael, a little later the grandkids around 7. By 8 o'clock tonight, everyone would know I was gone. I wondered what their first reaction would be. Worry, relief, panic, probably a mix of all 3. But it was no longer my responsibility to manage their emotions. For the first time in decades, my only responsibility was to take care of myself. The sun was setting when Diane went home. I was alone in my new apartment, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. I made a simple dinner, put on music that I liked, and sat on my balcony to look at the plants that would soon be mine. At 8:30, my cell phone started to ring. It was Linda. I let it go to voicemail. It kept ringing every 10 minutes for the next 2 hours. I didn't answer a single call. They wanted me to disappear, and that included not being available for their emotional crises when they finally realized what they had lost. That night I slept better than I had in years. In my own bed, in my own room, in my own house, without having to worry about bothering anyone with my movements, without having to justify my existence to anyone. My new life had begun, and I was completely at peace with my decision. The letter I left was simple, written in my most careful handwriting. Dear Linda, since you said it would be easier if I wasn't here, I decided it was time for you to find out how easy life really is without this burden around. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. You're all going to find out what life is like without this obstacle around. I wish you all happiness. With love, Mom. I left no address. I left no phone number. I gave no explanations beyond those lines. They wanted me to disappear from their lives, so that was exactly what I had done. The first few days in my new apartment, I felt like a teenager running away from home. It was a strange feeling of freedom mixed with sadness. I could watch TV at whatever volume I wanted. I could cook whatever I felt like. I could have Diane over for coffee without feeling like an intruder. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to ask permission to exist in my own home. Little by little, I discovered how good it was not to have to swallow silent slights, not having to pretend I didn't see the impatient glances, not having to hide in my room so I wouldn't bother anyone. Linda's first call came the next day. I watched the phone ring and didn't answer. She called me 15 more times that afternoon, and I didn't answer any of them. On the second day, she showed up at Diane's house desperate, asking if she knew where I was. Diane, who is a loyal friend, told her she didn't know anything. Linda cried, begged, said she was worried. But I knew it wasn't worry. It was the desperation of someone who realizes too late the value of what they had lost. Michael also came looking for me, offering apologies. He never offered when I was there every day. The grandkids sent loving messages to my cell phone messages they never sent when I lived in the same house with them. Grandma, where are you? We miss you so much. Please come back. It was funny how the affection had suddenly appeared when I was no longer available to receive it. Diane told me everything that happened when they came looking for me. Linda looks terrible, Emily. She hasn't slept. She has dark circles. She looks desperate. Michael is also very nervous. The grandkids ask about you every day. But for me, it was already too late. I had learned a precious lesson. Sometimes the only way to teach people our value is to show them what life is like without our presence. The first week was the hardest for them, according to what Diane told me. Linda had to miss 2 days of work because she couldn't concentrate. Michael had to hire a cleaning lady because the house was becoming a disaster without me. The grandkids complained that there was no more homemade food, that they missed my cooking, that the house felt empty without Grandma. But what impacted me most was learning they had discovered the payments I had been making monthly. When the electric bill arrived and they realized they had to pay double what they were used to, they understood that I had been covering half of the expenses all these years. The same thing happened with the water, the gas, and the extra $500 I deposited into Linda's account every month. We didn't know Mrs. Emily paid for so many things, Michael told Diane. We always thought she was just living with us, not that she was also helping us financially. Their ignorance hadn't been accidental. They had preferred not to ask where the extra money came from. They had preferred to assume my contribution was minimal. During the second week, the calls became more desperate. Linda left long, crying voicemails begging for forgiveness, promising that things would be different if I came back. Mom, please come back. We realize we made mistakes. The house isn't the same without you. The kids miss you. Michael misses you. I miss you so much. Please give me a chance to fix things. But I had spent 3 years waiting for things to change on their own. 3 years being patient. 3 years believing that love and kindness would be enough to earn their respect. Now I understood that some lessons are only learned through loss, and this was one lesson they had to learn completely. My new routine was simple but satisfying. I woke up when I wanted, ate a quiet breakfast while watching the news, and tended to the plants on my balcony, which had begun to bloom under my care. In the afternoons, I read embroidered or simply sat and enjoyed the silence without guilt. On Wednesdays and Fridays, I had Diane over for coffee, and we'd talk about everything except Linda. I had started attending a senior group at the local parish where I met other women with stories similar to mine. I discovered I wasn't the only mother who had become a burden to her children, and that comforted me in a strange way. These women understood my decision. They applauded it. They congratulated me for having the courage to reclaim my dignity. "You did the right thing, Emily," Mrs. Helen, a 75-year-old woman who had gone through something similar with her son, told me. "Children sometimes need to learn to value their parents the hard way. Not everyone has the courage to teach them that lesson like you did." 2 months went by, and they kept looking for me. Linda had hired a woman to do the cleaning I used to do for free. Michael had to learn to make his own breakfast because he no longer had someone to prepare it just the way he liked. The grandkids asked when Grandma was coming back to make the chocolate cake that only she knew how to make. One day, Diane told me she had seen Linda at the market. "She looked terrible, Emily. She's lost a lot of weight. She looks like she's not sleeping well. She asked about you again. She begged me to tell you she's willing to do whatever it takes for you to come back." But I had already made my decision. Some words come too late, and regret can't always repair the damage that's been done. During the 3rd month, the calls started to space out. Linda still called, but not every day. The messages became more thoughtful, less desperate. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. I realize I didn't value you as I should have. I know you might not want to come back, but I want you to know that I now understand how much you did for us and how much we needed you." It was exactly what I had waited to hear for 3 years. But now that she finally said it, it didn't have the same effect. The damage was already done. The trust was already broken. My new life was already established. I had learned to be happy without them. I had rediscovered who I was beyond being Linda's mom. One afternoon, while watering the plants on my balcony, I saw Linda from a distance at the bus stop. She was sitting on a bench staring into space, and she looked like she had aged 10 years in these few months. For a moment, I felt the urge to go to her, to hug her like I did when she was a little girl. But then I remembered the words I heard that terrible afternoon. It would just be easier if she wasn't here, and I continued watering my plants. Not with anger, but with the serenity of someone who finally understood that self-love is also a form of love. When I returned to my apartment, there was a letter from her under the door. I picked it up, looked at my name written in the handwriting I had known since she learned to write, and I put it in a drawer without opening it. Some words come too late, and silence is sometimes the most eloquent answer we can give. My new life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had moments of loneliness, moments when I missed the grandkids' laughter or the conversations with Linda before everything got complicated. But those moments of nostalgia were balanced by the immense peace of not having to justify my existence to anyone, of not having to walk on eggshells in my own home. I had made some new friends in the parish group. Mrs. Helen and I had become especially close. She was also a widow. She had also been through family conflicts. She had also had to make difficult decisions to preserve her dignity. We understood each other without needing many explanations. "Do you know what the most liberating part of all this is?" I told her one afternoon as we had coffee in my apartment. "For the first time in years, the decisions I make are only for my benefit. I don't have to consider if I'm going to bother someone, if I'm going to be a burden, if I'm going to create conflict." Mrs. Helen nodded with understanding. "That's exactly how it feels when you reclaim your independence after years of living for others. It's like breathing again after being underwater." The months continued to pass. Linda had stopped coming to Diane's house to look for me, but the letters kept arriving. I didn't open them, but I kept them all in a wooden box that David had given me years ago. Maybe one day I'd be curious enough to read what she had to say, but that day hadn't come yet. My routine had become satisfying and predictable. I got up early, did light exercises on the balcony, and ate breakfast while listening to the radio. In the mornings, I'd go out to run errands or get groceries, always stopping to chat with the neighbors, who had become friendly and warm. In the afternoons, I read embroidered or watched my favorite shows without interruption. The weekends were special. Mrs. Helen and I had started a tradition of cooking together on Saturdays. We'd prepare meals that we liked without having to consider anyone else's tastes. On Sundays, we went to church together and then walked through the downtown park watching the families, remembering our own times as young mothers, but without bitter nostalgia. One Sunday afternoon, 6 months after I left, I was sitting on a park bench when I saw a scene that struck me. A family was having a picnic. Young parents with 2 small children and an older woman who was clearly the grandmother. The woman was sitting alone at one corner of the blanket, eating in silence, while the rest of the family laughed and chatted lively. It reminded me of myself on the few occasions Linda had included me in their family outings. I had always been the third wheel, the obligatory guest who came along because it wasn't socially acceptable to leave her at home. Watching that woman, I felt a mix of compassion and relief. Compassion for her, relief that it wasn't me anymore. When I got back to my apartment that afternoon, I found something unexpected. Mason, my oldest grandson, was sitting on the steps of the building. He was 17 now, almost a man, but when he saw me, his eyes filled with tears like when he was a little boy. "Grandma," he said, standing up quickly, "I finally found you." My heart sped up. I hadn't seen either of my grandkids in all these months. Mason had grown. He was taller. His voice had changed completely. "How did you find me, sweetheart?" I asked him. "I've been looking for you for weeks. I asked all over the neighborhood until a lady told me a woman who matched your description lived here." He looked at me with pleading eyes. "Grandma, we all miss you so much. The house isn't the same without you." I felt my resolve waver for a moment. This was my grandson, the boy I had held in my arms, the one I had taught to ride a bike, the one I had spent so many afternoons playing and laughing with. But I also remembered how he had ignored me during the last few months I lived in that house, how he answered with one-word replies when I tried to talk to him. "Mason," I said gently, "do you really miss me, or do you miss the things I used to do for you?" He was quiet for a moment, processing the question. At first it was that he admitted with an honesty that surprised me. "I missed your food. I missed you tidying up my room. I missed you helping me with my homework." But after a while, I realized what I missed most was just talking to you, having you ask me how my day was, feeling like someone actually cared about what was happening to me. His words touched me deeply. "And why didn't you look for me sooner, honey? Why did you wait 6 months?" "Because Mom said we shouldn't bother you, that maybe you needed time alone, but I couldn't take it anymore. The house feels empty without you, Grandma. There's no more laughter, no more smell of good food. There's no one who really worries about us anymore." I invited him up to my apartment. I wanted to hear what he had to say, but I also wanted him to see what my new life was like. When we went inside, he looked around curiously. "It's nice, Grandma. It feels like a real home." I made him his favorite hot chocolate, the same kind I used to make him when he was little. We sat at my small round table, and for the first time in months, I had a real conversation with someone from my family. Mason told me about school, about his plans for college, about his dreams and worries. I listened to him the way I had learned to, with full attention, without judging, without interrupting. "Grandma," he said when it was getting late, "is there any way you can forgive Mom? She's really changed. She doesn't complain as much anymore. She doesn't say mean things about you. I think she realized how wrong she was." "Mason," I replied, "forgiveness isn't the problem. I don't hate your mom or your dad. I'm not even mad at you kids. The problem is that I learned to be happy without having to justify my existence to anyone. I learned that my worth doesn't depend on what others think of me." "But you miss us?" he asked in a small voice. "Of course I miss you, sweetheart. But there's a difference between missing someone and needing someone to be happy. I don't need your family's approval anymore to feel valuable, and that's a lesson that cost me 3 years of suffering to learn." Mason was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Can I come visit you every once in a while? Not to ask you to come back, just to talk to you like today." I thought about it carefully. "You can come, Mason, but it has to be your decision, not a mission your mom sent you on. And it has to be because you really want to be with me, not because you feel pity or guilt. It's because I love you, Grandma, and because I realized you're the only person in the house who really listened to me." That night after Mason left, I stayed awake for a long time. His visit had stirred up emotions I had managed to calm during these months, but it had also confirmed something important. My decision had been correct, not just for me, but for them too. Only when they lost my constant presence had they begun to truly value what I brought to their lives. 3 days later, Mason came back, and he continued to come every week for the following months. Our conversations became deeper, more honest. He told me about his problems with Linda, about how the house had become more tense after I left, about how he and his sister had to take on more household responsibilities. "You know what's weird, Grandma?" he told me one afternoon. "Mom cries a lot now. I never used to see her cry before, but now she cries when she thinks no one is watching." I didn't answer, but I understood. Linda was finally feeling the full weight of the loss. She hadn't just lost my practical help. She had lost the only person in her life who loved her unconditionally, and that loss had taught her something my words never could: the true value of a mother. 8 months had passed when I finally decided to open one of Linda's letters, the most recent one. With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope and read, Mom, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to write it. I've realized that for 3 years I treated you like you were just another piece of furniture in the house. I took you for granted. I assumed you would always be there no matter how I treated you. I didn't value your love, your help, your presence. I thought being your daughter gave me the right to treat you like a burden. I was completely wrong. Now I understand that you didn't need to live with me. I needed you to live with me, but I didn't know how to value it until it was too late. I'm not asking you to come back. I know that's not possible anymore. I just want you to know that I've learned my lesson, and I'm going to try to be a better person for the rest of my life. I love you, Mom. With all the regret in my heart, Linda. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. The apology I had waited years for had finally arrived, but now that I had it, I didn't need it anymore. My peace no longer depended on Linda's words. I had found my own path to happiness, and that path didn't require anyone else's validation. That night, as I got ready for bed, in my own bed, in my own room, in my own house, I reflected on the journey I had taken. I had lost a family that took me for granted, but I had gained my dignity, my peace of mind, and my independence. I had taught a painful but necessary lesson, and I had finally learned my own lesson, that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. Sometimes the only way to teach people our value is to show them what life is like without us. And now both they and I had learned that lesson forever. A year had passed since the day I walked out of that house forever. An entire year of waking up every morning without having to justify my existence to anyone, of making my own decisions, of living by my own rules. As I watered the plants on my balcony on this spring morning, I reflected on everything that had changed in my life and in theirs. The plants had bloomed beautifully under my care. I had red geraniums that filled the balcony with color peppermint that I used for my afternoon tea, and a small bougainvillea that had started to climb the wall. Taking care of these plants gave me a deep satisfaction. They were mine. They responded to my attention. They flourished because I cared for them with love and dedication. It was a perfect metaphor for what I had done with myself this past year. Mason still visited me every Sunday. Our conversations had become the most anticipated part of my week. He was no longer the quiet teenager glued to his phone that I had known at Linda's house. He was a thoughtful, intelligent young man who had learned to value deep conversations. He told me about his plans for college, about the girls he liked, about his dreams of studying engineering. Grandma, he had told me last Sunday, I think your decision to leave taught us all something very important. It taught me that older people aren't furniture you can just ignore. They have feelings, they have stories, they have wisdom that's worth listening to. His words filled me with pride. I hadn't just saved my own dignity. I had helped shape a more conscious and respectful young man. Mason also told me about Hope, my younger granddaughter. She misses you a lot, Grandma. She says she wants to learn to cook like you, that she wants you to teach her how to embroider like you taught me when I was little. It was painful to know my granddaughter missed me, but I also understood that some lessons require sacrifices. Hope was learning, even if indirectly, about the value of respecting elders. One day when she was an adult, she would treat her own parents with the consideration that they hadn't given me. My new friends from the parish group had become a constant source of support and companionship. Mrs. Helen and I had developed a deep friendship based on similar experiences and mutual understanding. Mrs. Miller, the woman who rented me the apartment, had become like an older sister. Mr. Arthur, a 75-year-old widower who also attended the group, had started inviting me for walks in the afternoons. It wasn't romance. It was companionship. We had both loved our deceased spouses deeply and weren't looking to replace them, but we enjoyed long conversations about books, about life, about our memories. Mr. Arthur had helped me fix a few things in the apartment. I cooked his favorite dishes for him from time to time. It was a balanced friendship where we both gave and received equally. Emily, he had told me a few weeks ago, it's admirable how you've rebuilt your life. Many people our age would have stayed in bitterness, but you chose peace. His words had made me reflect on my own healing process because it truly had been a healing process. The first few months had been difficult. Despite the freedom and peace I had gained, there were moments of intense loneliness, moments when I doubted my decision. There were nights when I heard the phone ringing with calls from Linda and had to use all my willpower not to answer. But gradually, that need for connection with them had faded. I had learned to fill my life with activities and relationships that nourished me instead of draining me. I had rediscovered the pleasure of reading without interruption, of listening to classical music, of embroidering tablecloths that no one would criticize for being old-fashioned. Linda's letters had continued to arrive throughout the year. At first they were desperate, then they became reflective. Finally, they had become informative. She told me about her life, about the changes in the house, about how the grandkids were growing up. The last few letters no longer asked for forgiveness or begged for my return. They simply shared family news, as if she were writing to a sister who lived far away. One of the most recent letters said, "Mom, I want you to know that Michael and I are attending family therapy. The psychologist has helped us understand many things about the way we treat the people we love. I've realized that I made the same mistakes with you that my mother-in-law made with me when I was young. It's a cycle I hope to break so that my children don't repeat it with their own families." It was interesting to read about her process of self-discovery. Linda was maturing. She was learning important lessons about respect and gratitude, but her growth was no longer my responsibility. It was no longer my job to educate or guide her. That had been one of the hardest things to accept, that my days of being an active mother were over. Now I could only be an observer of her evolution. Diane was still my link to the world I had left behind. Every Wednesday she came for coffee and told me the neighborhood news. "Linda looks better," she had told me last week. "She's gained a little weight back. She doesn't have those terrible dark circles anymore, but she seems different, more serious, more thoughtful, as if she matured overnight." She also told me about Michael. "He seems more involved in the house. Before he was always watching TV or on his phone, but now I see him helping with the shopping, taking the kids to school, as if he understood that he has to do the things you used to do." It was satisfying to know that my absence had forced positive changes in the family dynamic. Michael had to take on responsibilities he used to delegate to me. Linda had to face the household chores without help. The grandkids had to become more independent. In a way, my departure had benefited everyone, even if it had been painful. One afternoon, while organizing my old photos, I found a picture from the last Christmas I spent with them. In the photo, everyone was smiling around the tree, but I was in a corner almost out of the frame. It was a perfect image of what my place in that family had been: present, but invisible, included, but not integrated. I contrasted that photo with the most recent pictures from my new life. I had photos with my friends from the parish, with Mr. Arthur, on our walks with Diane during our coffee afternoons. In all these photos, I was in the center, smiling genuinely with a clear and serene gaze. The contrast between the woman I had been and the woman I was now was obvious. My daily routine had become a ritual of self-care and personal satisfaction. I got up at 6 in the morning, not because anyone asked me to, but because I liked to watch the sunrise from my balcony. I made my coffee exactly how I liked it, without having to consider anyone else's tastes. I ate a quiet breakfast while listening to the news or classical music. The mornings were for household chores, but done at my own pace and according to my standards. I cleaned my apartment because I liked it tidy, not because someone would criticize me if I didn't. I cooked dishes that I liked, experimented with new recipes without having to worry about pleasing picky eaters. The afternoons were sacred. I read novels I had wanted to read for years, but never had time for. I embroidered napkins and tablecloths that decorated my own home. I wrote in a journal I had started after moving, documenting my thoughts and feelings during this process of self-rediscovery. On Friday afternoons, I had started a new tradition. I would dress up nicely and go downtown by myself. I visited bookstores, had coffee in a nice cafe. Sometimes I went to the movies to see films I liked without having to negotiate with anyone about what to watch. It was my way of celebrating my independence and my freedom. One of those Friday afternoons, while having coffee somewhere near downtown, I saw something that struck me deeply. At the next table sat a family, young parents with a little girl and an older woman who was obviously the grandmother. The dynamic was the exact opposite of what I had experienced. The parents included the grandmother in all conversations, asked her opinion on different topics. The little girl snuggled against her with obvious affection. "Isn't it true my mom makes the best chili in the city?" the son said to his wife. "You have to teach me the recipe," the daughter-in-law replied with genuine interest. The grandmother smiled with pride and began to explain the secrets of her cooking. It was beautiful to see a family that worked as it should, with mutual respect, with appreciation for the wisdom of elders, with genuine love. It made me sad to think that this could have been my story if things had been different, but it also gave me hope to know that families like that existed, that the model of respect and affection for elders hadn't disappeared completely. When I returned to my apartment that afternoon, I found Mason waiting for me on the steps. It wasn't Sunday, his usual visiting day, and he seemed nervous. "Grandma," he said when he saw me, "I need to talk to you about something important." We went up to my apartment, and I made him his favorite hot chocolate. He looked more mature, more serious than usual. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked. "Grandma, tomorrow is your 69th birthday," he said directly. "Mom wants to know If you'd be willing to let us come visit you, not to ask you to come back, just to wish you a happy birthday. I had completely forgotten about my birthday. In previous years, Linda had organized small celebrations that always felt more like obligations than genuine celebration. This year, for the first time in decades, I had been so focused on my new life that I had lost track of the dates. "Mason," I said carefully, "is this your mom's idea? Or your idea?" "It's everyone's idea. Grandma, Mom, Dad Hope, and me. We've been planning it for weeks. We don't want to bother you, but we also don't want your birthday to pass without you knowing that we're still thinking about you." I thought about it for several minutes. For this entire year, I had maintained a strict no-contact policy with Linda and Michael. Mason was the only exception because he had sought out the relationship on his own initiative. But a birthday was different. It was a special occasion that could be handled with clear boundaries. "What exactly do you have in mind?" I asked. "A short visit, maybe an hour. Bring a cake, wish you happy birthday chat for a bit. Nothing dramatic, no begging or requests. Just a family wishing their grandmother a happy birthday." The proposal was reasonable and respectful. After a full year, maybe it was time for a small, controlled opening. "All right," I said finally, "but with clear conditions. 1 hour maximum. No discussions about the past. No requests for me to come back. Just a birthday visit." Mason smiled with relief. "Thank you, Grandma. I promise it will be exactly like you said." The next day, I woke up with a mix of nerves and curiosity. It was my first completely independent birthday, but it would also be my first encounter with Linda in a year. I got dressed carefully. I chose a dress that made me feel confident and dignified, and I prepared my apartment to receive visitors. They arrived promptly at 3 in the afternoon. Linda looked different, thinner, with a few new gray hairs, but also with a more serene expression. Michael seemed more humble, less arrogant. Hope had grown a lot already a teenager, and she looked at me with a mixture of shyness and affection. "Happy birthday, Mom," Linda said simply, handing me a bouquet of white flowers, my favorites. There were no dramatic hugs, no tears, no pleas, just a daughter wishing her mother a happy birthday. "Thank you for having us," Michael said, and for the first time in years, his gratitude seemed genuine. The visit was exactly as Mason had promised. They brought a chocolate cake, we sang happy birthday, we chatted about neutral topics, the weather, the news, the kids' school plans. Linda asked me about my plants, admired the decoration of my apartment, commented on how cozy the place felt. "You look happy here, Mom," she said at one point, and there was no reproach in her voice, only genuine observation. I replied simply. "I am happy here." The most emotional conversation was with Hope. "Grandma," she said while we were eating cake, "I learned how to make your oatmeal cookie recipe. They don't come out exactly like yours, but they're getting better." "I'm so glad, sweetheart," I answered. "Cooking is a way of showing love, and I'm sure your cookies are full of it." When the agreed-upon hour was up, they prepared to leave without any protest or attempts to extend the visit. Linda approached me at the door. "Mom," she said in a low voice, "I want you to know that I've learned a lot this year. I'm not going to ask you to come back because I understand that's not possible anymore. But I want you to know that I now value everything you did for us." "Thank you for telling me, Linda," I replied, "and thank you for respecting my boundaries today." After they left, I sat on my balcony processing the visit. It had been pleasant, civilized, respectful. Linda had shown a maturity I hadn't seen before. The grandkids had behaved with genuine consideration. Even Michael had been polite without being condescending. But the most important thing was that the visit had confirmed something crucial. I no longer needed their approval or their affection to be happy. It had been nice to see them, but when they left, I didn't feel the devastating emptiness I would have felt a year ago. My happiness no longer depended on them. That night, as I wrote in my journal about the day I reflected on the journey we had all taken, Linda had learned to value what she had lost. The grandkids had learned about respecting elders. Michael had learned to take on responsibilities he used to delegate to others. And I had learned the most important lesson of all, that self-love isn't selfishness, it's survival. 2 weeks after my birthday, I received a different kind of letter from Linda. It wasn't an apology or a plea, it was a proposal. "Mom," she wrote, "I've been thinking that maybe we could establish a new relationship. Not like before when I took you for granted, but as two adults who respect each other. I'd like to visit you every once in a while, maybe call you on the phone, occasionally keep in touch without pressure from either side. If you agree, we could try it little by little." The proposal was intelligent and mature. It acknowledged the new reality without trying to return to the past. It didn't ask for forgiveness or promise impossible changes. It simply suggested a new way of relating based on mutual respect. I wrote her back for the first time in a year. My letter was brief but kind. "Linda, I am willing to try a new relationship with you as long as we both understand that my independence is non-negotiable. We can be mother and daughter in a different way, more balanced, more respectful. But my current life is the one I have chosen, and that decision is final. In the following months, we established a routine of limited but genuine contact. Linda called me every 2 weeks to chat about everyday things. She visited me once a month, always with advance notice, always respecting the time limits I set. Gradually, we developed an adult relationship, woman to woman, which was very different from the dependent mother-daughter relationship we had before. The grandkids continued to visit me on their own schedules and desires. Mason every Sunday, Hope every other Saturday. They were visits I looked forward to because I knew they came because they wanted to be with me, not out of obligation. A year and a half after leaving their house, as I watered my plants on a golden autumn afternoon, I realized something important. I had gained much more than I had lost. I had lost a family that took me for granted, but I had gained one that respected me. I had lost a house where I was tolerated, but I had gained a home where I was valued. I had lost a life of unrecognized service, but I had gained a life of dignity and peace. The plants on my balcony had grown beautifully. The bougainvillea now covered an entire wall with its bright purple flowers. The geraniums bloomed in red cascades that brightened my mornings. The peppermint had grown so much that I now shared it with my neighbors. Just as these plants had flourished under my loving care, I too had flourished under my own care. I had learned to treat myself with the same gentleness I had always shown others. I had learned that my happiness was my responsibility, not my family's. As the sun set over my small balcony, I reflected on the silence I had chosen. It wasn't a silence of resentment or bitterness. It was a silence of peace, of dignity regained, of lessons learned by everyone. It was the silence of a woman who had finally learned her own worth and had decided not to accept anything less than she deserved. Sometimes the greatest new beginning is the silence one chooses to keep. I had found my peace in that small apartment, far from the disapproving glances and impatient sighs. My new life was simple, but it was mine. There was no one else making me feel like a burden. There were no more excuses I had to accept. There was only the silence I chose, and in that silence, I finally found my freedom. Linda could keep calling, she could keep visiting, but I had learned that not all love needs to be returned in the same way, and not every mother needs to accept being treated like an obstacle. Some relationships can be healed, but only when both sides have learned the necessary lessons. Sometimes the greatest new beginning is the silence one chooses to keep. We are curious to know what you think of this story. Where are you watching from? Comment below.